Good afternoon, HICA delegates, and good afternoon to all CNBC Africa viewers. We have a ministerial discussion session. I've got our Honourable National Minister van Schalkwyk. I've also got Minister Alan Wender from the Western Cape. I've got MEC Kolisile from Gauteng, and I have got MEC Mike Mabuyukulu from KwaZulu-Natal. First of all, starting off with you, Honourable Minister van Schalkwyk, we've been through a few sessions this morning. There were a few critical issues that came up, which I thought perhaps you could give us some sort of further input on. The first one is you've been recently at the Global Travel and Tourism Summit, and I think the major issue with it has been that global tourism has now actually reached the 1 billion mark. Aligned to that, in South Africa, we've had, and I think there's always debate as to whether it is just World Cup driven or it was demand driven in terms of the bullish trading environment 2004 to 2008. But we have a level of dilutionary inventory at the moment. Demand's still growing, but it's the actual occupancy across the hotels. How do you see us being able to actually grow our markets further, notwithstanding the growth that we've seen, but we need to grow our arrivals further or our markets further to be able to mop up, if I can call it that, the additional inventory that we've got at the moment and get out of a occupancy dilutionary position?
I'll answer your, is this on? It's on now? Yes. I'll answer your question in three parts. Let me first start with the global level. Last year, for the first time ever, we had 1 billion international travelers. And we see that growth increasing exponentially. By just a few years from now on, 2030, that will be up to 1.7 billion international travelers. Nothing that anybody can do is going to slow that down. People are going to travel more and more. Now, we are growing at the moment as South Africa at about 3 times the pace that we see international tourism growth, and we are outperforming all our direct competitors. Last week, we announced the results with the President. It was in Cape Town, 10.2% growth. But we did not only announce the growth in the number of tourists, we also announced the spend, and spend was up from America, from Europe, from Asia. The only market where spend was marginally down was Africa. And in terms of length of stay, it came down from just over 8 days per average to just over 7 days, and that is in line with the international trend. Now, the element that you specifically asked about is what is happening in the accommodation sector. On my way in, I saw Graham Wood. It was a bit dark. I thought it was Graham. Is Graham here? He's just left, the CEO of Tsogo-san, and he's also chairperson of our grading council. Now, you know, at the time of the World Cup, I sat down with many of our colleagues here and I said, all these new hotels that you are building, be careful. But I said, you know, that's not for us in government to tell you which investment decisions you must make. You make the investment, you carry the risk, you know what research you do before the time. Now, unfortunately, we ended up with, in layman's language, too much, or too many rooms, too much inventory after the World Cup. And if I look at the annual reports from the hotel groups who are presented here and also the private sector-led accommodation survey, it went up now from around 50% to 59, 60, 61%. Now, it will take us a time to catch up even further. But as a general rule, I've always believed that investment decisions should be demand-based decisions. But we are catching up, and I know that the headaches that it is causing in the industry. Some of the 5-star hotels are dropping prices, putting pressure on 4 and 3-star hotels. 3-star hotels are dropping prices, putting pressure on guest houses. Now, in the World Cup, and even now there are some people in the sector that approach me as minister, and they say, you know what, government should actually intervene. You know, government should at least give an indication how we should deal with this. In the World Cup, they said government should send out a list of recommended prices. You know what? It will be a major mistake if government gets involved in what is obviously a temporary problem. I'm a firm believer that there are some challenges that only the market should sort out and only private investors should sort out, not government.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister, and I think I fully appreciate what you're saying. I think industry also understands that the reason for the question was just to see how do we approach it, but thank you very much. On another issue, and perhaps it would probably refer a little bit to you as well, MEC Maboyukulu. The BRICS Summit was held here in Durban recently, and obviously major discussions were held there, and I would have imagined that travel and tourism would have been an important component of those discussions. From your perspective, Honourable Minister van Schalkwyk, what benefits or what opportunities are there for industry to be able to optimize out of the BRICS relationship?
I will be signing MOUs with a number of our BRICS colleagues over the next few weeks. I'm accompanying the President next week to Russia. And then we will open a new office in Brazil before the end of the year. And just outside BRICS, we will be opening new tourism offices in 3 African countries, Angola, Nigeria, Kenya, in this financial year. But BRICS specifically, there's tremendous potential. Our growth last year was 37% plus BRICS tourism growth. Now that's impressive in any language. And that ties in with what I said in my introduction, the huge potential in these markets. But we have to deal with some issues. The one issue that we have to deal with, and that's a broader issue, and let me be quite upfront about it. I don't think, I'm not talking about South Africa specifically, I don't want to embarrass any one of my colleagues. I'm speaking generally. The present visa system in the world is outdated. We need a system of e-visas and mobile visas on our cell phones. Not only do we have the technology, but from a security point of view, it will also be much more secure. And that's the argument that we must still win. And then the big challenge in the BRICS context is also the issue of connectivity. And in my view, I gave a briefing to the Cabinet recently. If we look at the way that traffic moves all over the world, the big gap is south-south travel. And in my view, South Africa is ideally situated to fill that gap and become a hub for south-south travel. But you know, that's only words. We must do much more to make it a reality.
Thank you. MEC Maboyukulu, you know, having been at the conference, I'm assuming, what were your viewpoints and where do you see opportunities specifically for KZN?
Well, let me say that I really concur with the Minister that if you take the BRICS member countries, they present to us a very huge opportunity. Already, with the 37% growth that is taking place within the BRICS member nations, I think we can be able to grow from where we stand as KwaZulu-Natal. We've already started a process, particularly we hosted the TAFI, which is the Travel Agents Federation of India. They hosted their conference here in Durban in February this year. And that is actually beginning to put a footprint into the Indian market. And it's important for us because it's a huge market. And I just want to underscore this point, that for us, opening opportunities within the BRICS member nation is not only for the benefit of us in KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa, it must also be for the benefit of the whole of the Southern African region. Because when we participate in this forum, I think there is a greater interest for the region and for ourselves as well. So it is on that basis that we are actually eyeing particularly consolidating our relationship with India in particular, using TAFI and others, but we'll also be focusing in putting our footprint in China. We already have started with a number of other contacts in China, which we will be building on as KZN, and we're also focusing on Brazil. Between ourselves and India, there is already a discussion with the Minister is well aware through the IPSA arrangement, where there has been an agreement around the key commodity, the key products in tourism, mainly that we will be focusing on safari tourism, Brazil will be focusing on the beach tourism, that India will be focusing on rural tourism. We think, therefore, that there's quite a lot of those we can be able to build on. particularly the fact that we have got the biggest Indian population outside of India. So there's a lot of opportunities that is there for us to be able to seize.
Thank you very much. I think leading on to a lot of our discussion this morning was around international tourism, around international arrivals, but I think more and more importantly, we are starting to grasp the dynamics of regional tourism and our importance as a regional player. And you know, I'm going as far afield. We in Gauteng have always known we are part of that regional community. Obviously, KwaZulu-Natal being close to Mozambique, Swaziland and Lesotho has also accepted that. But Western Cape, you know, who thought, and I think recently some of the research that's coming out of Western Cape is showing how popular it is as a destination in the regional market. And actually, drive trips, not necessarily only flight trips. So from that perspective, and also what our standing economist, Mr. Hart, said this morning, which is like, you know, I've just done some research in the area, and I just thought it was mind-blowing. He mentioned about Victoria Falls, and how does KwaZulu-Natal, let's forget about Johannesburg, how does KZN or Durban integrate with the Victoria Falls region? Now, I've recently done some work in Kasane, which is at the confluence of the Chobe and the Zambezi rivers, and it is also at the convergence of 5 countries, which is Angola, Namibia, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and obviously Botswana. There is a trans-frontier park that's being built there that's going to alleviate the visa and the passport issue and a single entry into the whole region. But very importantly, there is a 300 million Botswana Pula bridge that is being built across the Zambezi. And this is to facilitate transportation and travel and to ease that up in the region. But I don't know whether you're aware of this, Mr. MEC Mabuyakulu, is one of the strategic intents has been to be able to connect DRC to the port of Durban. And we have the economists talking about it this morning. We've done some research, and this is what's coming out of it. But that's just an introduction to the whole regional plan. And perhaps I'd like to hear, maybe starting with you, MEC, is what is our viewpoint in Gauteng in terms of our regional integration, regional tourism responsibility, and regional market attractiveness?
Well, number one is that people are very, very important in tourism. Is it on now?
So,
people are very, very important in tourism. Partnerships, relationships are very, very important. Working with the people in the region is going to be key for us to drive tourism, especially in southern Africa. We have, as Gauteng province, even been to the province of Katanga in the DRC, working with the people there to try and build partnerships with the people. Being Gauteng province as a heartbeat of our economy and as a hub of our economy, but also as a gateway, we therefore play a very, very important role in terms of creating these linkages and people-to-people relationships. We working with the private sector, you know, in terms of the white paper on tourism. We talk about us government creating an enabling environment. We are leading, but private sector being the drivers and working with the communities as a base that is going to be community-based. So working with the people, working with the communities, working with the people in the region is going to be very, very important. And I think with the infrastructure that is developing with Gauteng province, obviously, occupying that position, we are going to be even in a far better position. The linkages you're talking about between the KZN, the DRC, Gauteng is going to be, again, another gateway, is going to be a corridor. We have to make these things happen, even in terms of flying. All these things hinge around Gauteng province. So we are going to be playing a very, very important role. But I think, as the minister said, there are a few things we need to do. Remove unnecessary barriers. I think another person spoke here about The green tape, we need the green tape in tourism. We need certainty. We need predictability. We are going to be opening the Gauteng Investment Center so that when people come, through the click of the button, we can show the people that this is where your next investment is. The question around the environment, which was raised again earlier on, is going to be very, very important. That linkages, that governments talk to one another, people talk to one another, and using private sector as well, so that there's no gap in the systems. Innovation is going to be quite key again for us to harness all this that we want to build.
Agreed, and as part of that, Gauteng becomes a little bit of a hub to getting this all together.
Exactly, and that becomes a very, very important ingredient, as you said.
Great. Minister Alan Winder, you know, we often talk about the international market and its relationship, especially to the Western Cape. We know that KwaZulu-Natal is the domestic haven in South Africa, if I can put it that way. How do you see the role developing in terms of Western Cape, in terms of my earlier comments and what we're discussing right now, both from a growing domestic emerging middle market, and let's not put a racial tab to it, but it's across all barriers, as well as the same growth through economic growth throughout Africa and that regional opportunity that exists for Western Cape?
Okay, I think first, from the discussion that was happening earlier, you know, how does government get involved in this partnership? And I think also, what do we do as government? And I think I want to take us back as a region, because you've got three heavy competitors here sitting in the room as provinces. And I think at one stage as government, and even going down the value chain, or the food chain, should I say, down to even municipal level, we were all competing with each other in the international space. And it was about a year ago, a bit more than a year ago, at this forum that we meet with, where all the MECs come together with the minister, we said, let's have a look at our marketing and how we spend and direct marketing money. And I think we all consciously made this decision that we've got to go out together when it gets into the international space, but we must focus on, and we must take charge of focusing on what you're talking about, this regional tourism or inter-regional tourism in our own domestic market. And I think we've really grasped that and taken it and worked very hard at it. And you know, the KZN, that's the target that we set ourselves against, and go and really look at how we attract that domestic market to our region. And I think the numbers are now starting to show that our change of focus is making a difference for us in the Western Cape. I'll just give you two practical examples. When we used to launch the Jazz Festival or the JNB Met, it would be launched in a boardroom in Cape Town. Now we actually go to Gauteng and we launch the JNB Met in Gauteng. We start putting the packages together because we know that's the market that we want to attract to the region. So, I mean, that increases the competitiveness amongst ourselves. But that's on the one side. On the other side, it's how we then together say, well, fine, that's inside South Africa, creating what we heard earlier, getting into those new travelers in South Africa, who the new emerging middle class, how are we getting them into travel? And then the other side is how we then come together to approach the international market. So that we don't, it's about the rand spend, because the discussion earlier was, what else is government going to do? So I think government focuses a lot of expenditure at the moment on infrastructure. We heard in the previous discussion around infrastructure versus airport taxes, but we win all the awards for the best airports in Africa. There's infrastructure, and they really are. It's great infrastructure. And now, you know, we're hearing the call for lowering the taxes, but we had to pay for that infrastructure. That's about choices that we need to make within government, where we spend that money. The same thing goes with marketing money, because the kind of marketing money that's spent from a government space, how are we spending it? And that's the partnership that we've got to build and discuss, so that we have that inter-regional competitiveness, but at the same time we also have that global competitiveness, but as a single unit, because we need people to make the decision on whether Australia or South Africa, or, you know, the East or Africa. And they've got to make that decision first before we get down to whether they're going to go to Victoria Falls or to Cape Town.
Well, at least we don't have nicknames for Indians and Chinese like the Aussies have, but let's veer away from that. Having said that, emanating from that is another critical issue, and probably it would be the last point that we can address. But in terms of inventory, we've had about a close on to 50% growth in inventory in hotel rooms in Cape Town. Not much outside of Cape Town, but I think it's exactly the same in Durban and KZN and Johannesburg, and I'll come to those numbers very quickly. But we've had about a 50% growth in Cape Town, and very, very biased towards 5-star and a little bit at the upper 4-star level. If we look at Durban and if we look at KZN and KZN's market, there has been also about a 39 to 40% growth in inventory. It has been focused on the mid to upscale market and not the 5-star market. And you know, it's directly talking to its regional market, it's talking to its domestic market. And I think at the same token, what we're starting to see as analysts and researchers out in industry, that even the FIT travelers' preference is changing. You know, people don't necessarily want to stay in a 5,000 Rand a night 5-star hotel anymore. And I think if we look at Gauteng again, we've had quite a bit of inventory increase in Gauteng. And also it's pretty much across the board. We've had a strong 5-star increase, but then there is a fairly strong 5-star market. So across the board, you know, I'd like to pose the question is, we know and understand that you don't direct this development. It's, as Honourable Minister van Schalkwyk said, it's at the risk of the developers themselves and the hotel companies and property companies. But how aligned is our inventory, and especially our accelerated growth in inventory, to the new markets that we want to bring in? We're focusing on the Chinese and Indian market, or the BRICS markets. We're focusing on the regional market. These are savvy travelers. So how appropriate is our inventory? And yeah, are we going to see some changes in that? Perhaps Honourable Minister van Schalkwyk, if you want to give us your early comment on it.
I'll come back with a broader point, but I don't know. I think you asked specifically Western Cape. I think
I'm
Alan
looking
is
at Western
better
Cape
suited to
partly,
answer
yes,
that,
yeah.
yes.
Okay, well, I think from the Western Cape point of view, you know, obviously the private sector needs to do what they need to do, and then we will come in with the discussion around how we do some destination marketing, which makes effect to it. But I think that in the Western Cape specifically, one of the areas that we have a lot of government spending is our events. Mm-hmm. So right now we've got World Economic Forum Africa happening. So that helps the market that you're talking about. We have some major events. You have the mining in Durban. You have these big events that actually talk to that market, mm-hmm. which is slightly different. It's the business space, which is slightly different to the new tourism growth that we're seeing coming specifically out of the new focuses into the East, India and China. And it's trying to find the balance between the two, number one, and trying to increase the seasonality. Because you also, I mentioned events, and we have all these events that are focused in one time of the year, mm-hmm. and we need to start moving them out of this, or start getting new events happening in our quieter seasons, so that we don't get those price differentials that we were hearing about earlier, and how that also causes disruptions in the market where we have these major ups and downs. And then that talks to airlift, it talks to everything. So it's about bringing all of those strategies together. The private sector must make those decisions within that framework. And we will make sure that we make educated choices, looking at the stats on how we affect that spend of the marketing money within the region, to try and make sure that we don't have those troughs or put our businesses at huge risk. Because the one thing that we don't want from a government point of view is to see businesses closing. Our unemployment rate is far too high. This is one sector that we focus on, but we've got to make sure that this sector grows so that we make a difference and change that unemployment rate, that space of risk for South Africa.
Okay, thank you.
Let's make a broader point about government and private sector. Partnership between government and private sector is absolutely essential. Now, as we sit here as people in government, we don't take these decisions on our own. Obviously, you know, we take decisions on policy frameworks and budgets and so on. But when it comes to the marketing of the country, we decided, all of us jointly, we want a model where we want the private sector in as a full partner, but not only as a full partner to advise us, but to actually take decisions. Now, at a national level, what do I do every year? Every year I transfer to South African tourism. This year, where's the Director General? Is he here? But Ndaba, it will be about what, 800 million rand, right? From the national budget to South African tourism. Now, that money will be used to market the country internationally. The moment I transfer that money, I say to that board, made up of people who are here, captains of industry from the accommodation sector, other subsectors, you take that decision. And they do proper market analysis, and then they spend the money. So it's actually the private sector who helps us to spend the money. And the same is the case at provincial level as well. But then the point that both Mike and Alan made, how we spend our money, because we don't have unlimited budgets, it's absolutely crucial. And that's where we would like advice from, a group like this, apart from the fact that there may be individuals who serve in these structures. Now let me, it's a very sensitive issue. But when we market the country internationally,